I would just say 2 words for the association who organized the evening. It's very important to support us. So we are a very young association with a lot of regions we cover already. We have 14 regions in Switzerland. So we raise awareness to help people to get to live with less waste. So it's not an easy task because we are trying to avoid the waste at the source and not produce it at all. So just to tell you that we are here, we are not that known for the moment, but we are growing very fast, and it's not easy to manage and coordinate the whole thing. Look, we are the public utility recognized and have more than 1,000 members. So if somebody between you wants to become a member, you are very welcome to do that. And what we do is inspire people. So that's what Rob will doing this evening. We enable also people, but most of the time we are already aware of the problem. We know there is too much waste, but we don't know how to avoid the waste. So we are helping with workshops and other activities to help concretely the people. And we also now engage with companies and municipalities to really do the whole thing together and engage also the professional and political way of living. So I have talked a lot now, so I will give the microphone to Rob, and let's do. So he don't need the microphone. So have fun with Rob. See you later.
Thanks. All right, very nice to be here with all of you. I arrived in Europe about a few days before the pandemic began, and I was here for a whole speaking tour, and Natalie and ZeroWaste Switzerland we had a couple talks lined up in March, which some of you were going to come to, and obviously those didn't happen. And the last talk that I gave was in Amsterdam around March 10th. And I remember saying that this might be the last talk that I give, but luckily we were able to do one talk tonight. So it's beautiful to be here with you all. And I'll get to give one more talk in Paris before heading back to the United States in a week. So I'm very glad that we were able to come out and spend some nice time together, and that afterwards we'll get to have some dinner together. And I just want to say thanks to ZeroWaste Switzerland and to Natalie for putting this on. And I've been in Switzerland for about 4 days, and it's been the best 4 days of 2020. So yeah, it's been fantastic. I'd love to stay here for the rest of the year, but got to go back to the United States. Whoa, what the heck's that? There's all these arrows. Never seen that before. So tonight, the focus of tonight, am I in my box, by the way? Yeah, okay. We put these little wooden sticks down to make sure that I stayed within the camera. So tonight the focus is waste. You know, that's the large focus of ZeroWaste Switzerland, is helping us to create a lot less garbage and not trash the earth that we live on. But it's also about not trashing humanity and not trashing the environment. And so it's so much more than just waste. It's really about how we interact with society, how we interact with the world, and how we interact with other species. So tonight I'm going to introduce you to a handful of the projects that I've been working on that are designed to bring awareness to issues that we deal with. But as Natalie...
It's somebody's kid who's playing with the whiteboard on the Zoom.
That's why the arrow.
Okay. As is it on the next one too? Oh, is this thing working? Huh. Can you make it go away or no? It's fine if it's there, but it'd be better without it. You can start the PowerPoint over and I'll keep talking. So, oh yeah. So as Natalie mentioned, you know, most of us know about the problems that we're dealing with, or at least a lot of the problems. So my focus is less on the problem and more on the solution. What can we do to be the changes that we wish to see in the world? What can we do to be a part of the positive solution? So tonight I am going to talk a little bit about some of the daunting issues that we're facing. But the idea, you know, I just want to say, don't get overwhelmed with that, because tonight's really a story of solutions. It's what we can do as individuals and as communities to make the world around us a better place. And I also just want to give one disclaimer, and that is that I do a lot of things that are pretty extreme. As you'll see, I go to extreme measures to bring attention to important issues. But the message is not that anyone here has to go out there and do these extreme things. It's really about self-reflecting on our own lives and asking, are we living the lives we want? Or are there things that we want to change to really live the lives we want and live in a way that's beneficial to the earth, our communities, and ourselves? So I just like to give that disclaimer, that not get overwhelmed and not looking at like what I'm doing and say, well, I can't do that. Instead, the question is, what can I do? So one of my projects is called the Food Waste Fiasco. I've dived into a few thousand dumpsters across the United States, none in Switzerland, but some in other parts of Europe. And I do these food waste demonstrations to help create a visual to help people understand the issue of food waste. So here in Switzerland and around the world, we waste about 1/3 of all the food we produce. But it's very hard to really understand. I mean, imagine 1/3 of the food we waste globally is wasted while 1 billion people are food insecure. Those are huge numbers, so it's kind of hard to understand that. What I like to do is create visuals that help us to understand these really complex issues in a bit more of a easier visual way. So this is one of my food waste fiascos. This is just 2 days worth of collecting food from grocery store dumpsters and taking it to a public park. And I've done these demonstrations in about 15 cities across the United States. And I found the main limiting factor in the size of the demonstration is the size of the vehicle that I have to transport the food that I find. Again, I referenced the United States, but Switzerland is in a pretty similar situation as the United States. Oh, now this thing doesn't work? Oh, it is that one. Did we skip one? Okay. All right, another one of my projects was called Share My Way Home. And in this project, I wanted to create another narrative to what you often see on the mainstream media. The mainstream media often portrays the world as this very dangerous and violent place. Less so here in Switzerland, but more so in the United States and some countries. Probably more in the UK than here in Switzerland, I would say. So I wanted to actually show that most people are good. So what I did is I landed in Panama, in Central America, with no money, with just the clothes on my back and my passport, pretty similar to this. And I had to travel 7,000 kilometers home through Central America, largely dependent upon the kindness of others, as well as resourcefulness skills. And when I got back from that trip, the only words I could really mutter out of my mouth were just, people are good. Okay, did we skip one already? Is this thing? No, this thing's not working anymore. I'll get to that. All right, back. Is this thing, am I supposed to be clicking over here? Oh, now it's working. Okay, so now to your question. So another one of my things that I've done to sort of go to the extreme, the average person has tens of thousands of possessions today. I simplified my life down to 111 possessions, all of which that fit into a backpack. And the idea is to create thinking. Does more stuff make us happier? Does it give us the purpose and passion we want? Or does it actually get in the way of living the lives that we truly want? And then another one of my projects, it works. And then if I stop, then it doesn't work anymore. There we go. Another one of my projects was living in a tiny house. This is 50 square feet, so 5 square meters. So it was not quite wide enough for me to stretch my arms out, and just barely tall enough for me to stand about like this. So the reason for that is that house sizes in many nations have doubled over the last few decades, while less people are living in them. And we see us having more stuff and larger houses, but actually we don't see our health and happiness doubling. And in some nations, a lot of Western nations, we actually see health and happiness decreasing for the first time. So again, it's about questioning, does a bigger house give us the lives we want? Does it serve us like we might think it does? And then lastly, the main project we're going to talk about is Trash Me. So the average Westerner creates about 4.5 pounds or 2 kilos of trash per day. But for most of us, we never really think twice about it. We put it in the garbage can, as you can see here. We just stick it in the garbage can, and then it's taken away by the garbage people. And then it's out of sight, out of mind. We don't really have to think about it and how much it adds up. So to create a visual that would help us understand how much it adds up, what I did is for 1 month, I wore all of the trash that I created to really help people understand how much it adds up. So here in Switzerland, the average person creates about 800 kilos of trash per year, or about 2 kilos of trash per day. So in order to do this, I had a specially designed trash suit made. So it was made by a designer. Her name is Nancy Judd. And you can see this is the suit on day 1. I just had a tiny bit of trash here. And you can imagine carrying, so if the average person creates about 2 kilos of trash per day, that means after a month, you would have 60 kilos of trash if you held on to it. So she designed a suit that could hold 60 kilos of trash worth of weight with these pockets that would expand out, and they were clear pockets so that I could each day add on and create that visual. So the idea, normally, I actually live a pretty zero waste life. In 2011, I woke up and I realized that I was filling my garbage can full of trash and that I was causing a huge amount of destruction. And so since 2011, I started to transition to a more zero waste life. But for this 1 month, I put all of that aside and I ate, I shopped, and I consumed like the average person does, because I needed it to look like what the average person creates so they could relate. If it was just tofu wrappers, the average American would be like, they wouldn't relate. So instead I went to McDonald's and Burger King and got delivery pizza and all of that for a month. So this is about day 7 into the project. And so each day I weighed the trash that I added to myself to keep track, and it ended up being about 1.5 kilos of trash per day. So I didn't create as much trash as the average person. I found it a little hard to do that, but it was about 1.5 kilos of trash per day, just living like the average person. Now the idea was that I did not want to create I wanted to create a visual representation, not a smelly representation. So all of the food waste, I actually weighed it and then I replaced it with dried rice and put it inside of my suit so that I didn't become a moldy, smelly walking trash monster. And then as far as some people would ask about toilet paper went down the toilet as usual. That is, down the toilet as usual. Okay, so why do this? Why go to the extreme of wearing all of my trash and walking around New York City every single day? It could be kind of embarrassing. It's not exactly easy. It's not exactly fun. After a certain period of time, I could barely fit into the subway station anymore. So the reason why is I wanted to, again, create a visual that helped us more deeply understand this, and then to go into the deeper conversation of the truth of our trash. So it's pretty easy to see here how much it adds up after a short period of time. I mean, imagine this is just 1 month. So imagine a year, imagine 10 years, imagine a lifetime. You know, in one lifetime, you can create a small mountain worth of trash. And that's the idea. But the truth is that that is just the tip of the trash iceberg. So for every garbage can of trash that we put on the curb, it's estimated that about 70 garbage cans worth of waste are produced up the production line. So what we see is just the absolute tiniest fraction. And that comes from the manufacturing, from the extraction of raw materials from the earth, the blowing up of mountaintops in order to get the minerals and the resources below that, the deforestation. Right now, it's estimated that as much as 30,000 species are going extinct per year. And a lot of that is because of our disposable lifestyles. And then there's the reality behind when we buy things that they appear inexpensive. What's the reality is that there's a lot of externalized costs. So companies are able to make things very inexpensively by putting the costs on the environment, other species, and on people that are considered less important by corporations and by governments. So again, you can see the visual, but really behind that, there's so much more. So the goal really is, it's about really looking at our actions and going far deeper and understanding our actions. And then if we don't like the truth behind our actions, figuring out how we can positively change them. So speaking of positively change, a lot of people would say, well, I recycle, so it's fine, like, right? As long as I'm recycling, then no problem. I don't know, can you really see the pictures from back there, or is it kind of hard with the light? Well, this is a worthwhile picture because what you see here, how many of you think that looks really environmentally friendly, like the solution to our problems? I mean, you might think that that looks like a landfill, a garbage dump, but that's actually a recycling center. So this is what we think is environmentally friendly. When I went there, one of the saddest days of the project was actually going to the recycling center, a day when a lot of people would think we'd be hopeful. I saw, oh, this is what we think is the solution. So the truth about recycling, some things recycle really well, like glass and metal and paper are the easiest things to recycle. But it's estimated that about 90% of plastic is not actually recycled. Recycling plastic is, in most countries, largely a myth in the grand scheme of things. So a new term that you might hear is downcycling. So recycling, you've all seen the recycle sign. It's arrows that point to each other and they don't go anywhere. They keep coming back. It's just one triangle. But the truth about most of our recycling is it doesn't have a closed loop cycle. It goes like this, and then it goes down to some other inferior product. So that's called downcycling. So if things are recycled, like plastic, it's usually downcycled into a lesser product that then cannot be recycled. So it's not as bad as the landfill, but it's not true recycling. The other thing is that it's highly resource and energy intensive. So to recycle takes an incredible amount of electricity, often water, and resources to do so. So if you really get into the zero waste movement, one of the things that you'll hear is that the goal is not to recycle more, it's actually to recycle less. That's something that Bea Johnson says a lot, that some of you have probably heard of or maybe been to one of her talks before. But in zero waste, it's like a lot of people would think the goal is, I'm going to recycle more. But in the true zero waste movement, the goal is to try to recycle as little as possible. Of course, to recycle the things that you can't avoid, but actually avoid recycling as much as possible. So the activism that I do is designed to really work in many ways and create visuals that help people more deeply understand issues. So one of the things is it's designed to really engage people. So one of the stereotypes of environmental activists is very angry people that are constantly yelling and telling you what to do and what not to do. And there certainly are a lot of environmental activists like that, but Zero Waste Switzerland would actually be a beautiful example that's not like that. It's actually about empowering people and talking about solutions rather than telling people that they're wrong, wrong, wrong. So I take the same strategy as Zero Waste Switzerland. It's about meeting people where they are and finding ways to meet them and then helping them to make positive changes. So the activism I do is designed to engage with people and meet with them where they are and help them to understand issues and then be a part of the solution. And then the other aspect of it is working with media. So today, and I guess one thing to keep in mind with a lot of the things I say is I come from the United States, and a lot of things are way worse over there. You have a really beautiful life over here in Switzerland. But like when it comes to media in the United States, to get them to report on environmental issues, sometimes you have to go to some extreme measures because they mostly just want to report on, well, what the president is doing or on, you know, basketball or golf or football, things like that. So it's a little harder sometimes to get the messages out there that are important when it comes to environmental and humanitarian issues. So one of the things, you know, if any of you are really wanting to create change, one of the things that I found effective is creating stories that you know are easy for media to tell. So Trash Me, oh nice, we got the arrows gone? Cool. Nice work. Looks good. So today we live in a very visual culture, and so media really likes visual stories. So Trash Me was able to have over 1 billion media impressions because it was a very easy to tell story for media that was able to easily tell a much deeper message, but in a very simple way that they could use with photo, with video, on TV and magazines and such. And then also, maybe you'll click it. Maybe if I do that, you can just pretend that. I'll just go like this. And then the idea is to try to make messages that are understandable by everyone, whether we're, you know, 80, 90 years old or 10 years old, whatever walk of life we're from. So this is Everett, and when he saw me do Trash Me, he decided to do it at his school as well. So this is him after wearing all of his trash for 2 weeks, and he got permission from his principal, and he every day added his trash and did a campaign at his own school to teach his fellow classmates. And then after 2 weeks of wearing his trash, then he did 2 weeks where he tried to create as little trash as possible. And this is the amount of trash that he created in 2 weeks. So this is the average kid, and this is the kid that's trying really hard not to create trash. So that's Trash Me. And then I want to, I'm going to share a couple of my other projects as well. And a lot of these focus around waste, but again, it's the big picture. You know, when you really look at the world, you realize that nothing is isolated, nothing is separate. It's all connected. So one of my first projects, and this is actually what the book is about. If you end up getting this book, it's about my first project, which was to bike across the United States on a bicycle made out of bamboo. And also, if you do get the book, 100% of my proceeds are donated to indigenous and women-led environmental nonprofits. So that's where a good portion of the funds go to. So in this project, the idea was to try to cross the United States and have no negative environmental impact. And so I set basic rules for all of the key aspects of sustainable living. Click. Oh, it worked. So the basic things that all of us deal with every single day, whether we realize it or not, when it comes to sustainable living are food, water, energy, waste, and transportation. So that's what I consider the 5 key pillars of how on a daily basis our actions interact with the world, whether we see it or not. So on this trip, I set basic rules for those 5 pillars of sustainable living. For food, I could only eat local, organic, unpackaged food. So that meant whatever state that I was in, the food had to come from that state, It had to be, when I say organic, it didn't mean it has to be, it doesn't mean it has to have the label organic. It means I talked to the farmer and I learned their practices. And then it was also unpackaged. So not that after I ate the food, there was no garbage left behind. Now, during that time, I don't think it's ever really worked much. So during that time, the exception that I made was that I could eat any food that was going to waste. Because if food is already thrown away, then there's no negative environmental impact by eating it, because you're saving a wasted resource. And actually, it turns out that dumpster diving, that's what we call it in English, it's an environmentally friendly thing to do because you're actually keeping it from going to the landfill and not needing to use virgin resources. So I learned that there's a lot of places where there is no local, organic, unpackaged food. Switzerland is a pretty great country for sourcing local food. Like probably almost everyone in Switzerland eats some local food most days, I would imagine. Not all, but at least some of the food. But in the United States, we have something called food deserts, which are areas where there's no access to not even local, organic, unpackaged, but almost anything healthy. Like you might be able to go to the gas station and buy a banana or an orange, and the banana might be $1 instead of 25 cents because there's not many bananas there. So anyway, I learned that there wasn't access to healthy food, so I made an exception, and that was that I could eat food that was going to waste, so dumpster diving. And what I found as I started to travel across the country was that dumpster after dumpster after dumpster all across the United States was filled with perfectly good food. And I learned that in the United States, about half of all the food that we produce is wasted, while 1 in 7 citizens are food insecure. Here, it's probably somewhere around 30 or 40% of food is wasted. So most Western nations, it's probably somewhere around the 30% mark. And if you can see this picture, you can see it's perfectly good food. I'm holding apples and tomatoes. There's heads of lettuce and herbs. And this, for example, is the food that I took out of just one dumpster in a matter of about 5 minutes as I was traveling through Nebraska. So this one dumpster had enough food to feed about 50 families for an entire weekend. And this was just one example. So what I found is that all across the nation, food is being wasted. Unfortunately, I have not sampled the dumpsters of Switzerland, and most people tell me that they don't think that you can, but also they haven't tried, so I definitely do not believe them yet. I know plenty of people dumpster dive in Germany and France. And Denmark. There's actually a really good Instagram page by my friend Matt, that's An Urban Harvester, and he did a year of dumpster diving in Denmark where he showed each day, and it was astonishing. So it's happening all over the place, not just in the United States. Okay, so the other rule was for water. I couldn't use any water from on the grid, so no water that came from the cities that was purified, which meant no turning on a faucet, using a shower, a flush toilet. For the entire summer, I had to get my water from lakes and rivers and purify it with a little purifier that I had. And then I could also, oh, maybe, yeah. I could also use water that was going to waste. So this was an example of a fire hydrant that I filled my water with this was in the Bronx. And then for electricity, for the entire summer, I could only use electricity that I created with the small solar panels that I was carrying. So no plugging into an outlet, well, I couldn't have touched this thing for the whole summer. If I wanted to go into a store that only had automatic doors, I had to wait till someone else walked through the doors, and then I'd have to hop in behind them. So basically, I analyzed every action that I was taking all the way across the country. And with electricity, I learned just how electrified my life was and how I was using it at every second of every single waking moment. And when I went further, I realized I was using it at every second of every sleeping moment too. because everything that we put online, we have a saying the cloud, which means that the stuff is hosted up in the air. But everything we put on the internet is actually hosted on computers somewhere that are all using electricity. So every second of the day, our Facebook, our Instagram, our YouTube, our websites, stuff we store online is all burning electricity. But it wasn't until I stripped my life back to the basics that I was able to start to understand how complex our lives are, how today we live in a very globalized world where every single action we take has ripples around the world, whether we realize it or not. And then for waste, every piece of trash that I created, I had to carry across the country with me. So remember how much trash I created living like the average Westerner. If I did that, I wouldn't have been able to bike across the country because it would have been too much weight. But this is the amount of trash that I created in 104 days of biking across the country. So it was about 1 kilo of trash. After I got back from, and then of course, I could only bike across the country and not use any fossil fuels. And so on this trip, you can see it was sort of an individualistic trip. And you know, I'm a young guy, so biking across the country is something that is not accessible to a lot of people, a lot easier for me than a lot of people. So the big lessons that I really learned was looking at sustainability and seeing how it's applicable in different ways. So the bicycle I learned was, I learned the power of a bicycle. I met 70-year-old women that were biking all the way across the country, and they had their husbands in a camper following them, to make them a meal and have a nice bed, but still 70 years old and biking all across the mountain ranges across the country. And I met kids that were 4 or 5 years old biking to school with their parents. And I met people that at the time I thought were far too overweight to ride a bicycle, but they were, we have a very large obesity epidemic in the United States. Some people are 75 kilos overweight, but still biking 5-10 kilometers to work and back every day. So I really learned how powerful of a tool the bicycle is and how applicable it is to so many people. So when I got back from that trip, after a while, I decided I wanted to try to do the same, but living in San Diego. So this is the tiny house that I lived in. Originally, I was planning on building a tiny house, but I went on to Craigslist one day and I found this, and it said it was only $950. So that'd probably be like 700 francs or 800 francs. So I decided to buy it. And I realized pretty quickly why it was so cheap. This is the size of it. You can see my bed and my futon took up about 60% of the whole house. So it was quite small. But again, the idea was, I thought this would be a great way to get people thinking about the size of their houses and whether they really need a 5-bedroom house. And it worked. Before I even moved the tiny house into the place that I was going to, the news already came and met me on the streets because it was a visual that they could really share. So at the tiny house, I was living in San Diego. So San Diego is a desert. So here you get quite a bit of rain, but there we get about less than 25 centimeters per year. So that's anything under 25 centimeters is considered a desert. We probably got more like 18 to 20 centimeters. So I didn't grow a lot of food, but I used what are called Wicking Bed Gardens, which are basically you create reservoirs below the soil so that the water can wick up, and then there's very little evaporation. So it's not such an important technology here where you have a lot of water. It's more of a desert thing. So for water, a lot of people would imagine that so here I lived off the grid as well. So that meant I couldn't use any water from the faucet at my house. So my only water was from harvesting rainwater. So a lot of people would think in a desert, you wouldn't be able to live just off rainwater. But not only was it a desert, it was actually during California's mega drought, one of the largest droughts, or the largest drought in recorded history. But even in a desert in the mega drought, I was still able to harvest enough water in order to be able to comfortably live off about 20 liters of water per day. So that's, if you can see this big blue jug. It's about one of these jugs per day. And the reason I was able to manage that is because one of the things that I've learned through all of this is that sustainability is largely a matter of perspective. And honestly, most things in life are a matter of perspective. So the average North American uses about 400 liters of water per day. The average Western European uses about 200 liters of water per day. And the average person in sub-Saharan Africa, which is 50 countries, uses about 20 liters of water per day. So to the average person in Africa, it would be crazy to use as much water as the average American or Western European. And to the average Western European, it would be just unheard of to use as little water as the average person in Africa. And so when I started to see that things are largely just a matter of perspective, and what we do is we generally just do what we see around us. Normal is just seeing the same thing over and over, day after day, week after week, year after year, and seeing most everybody else doing it. And it's amazing how quickly something that's completely abnormal can become normal as long as most people are doing it and you do it for a period of time. So once I realized that most things are a matter of perspective, I realized that I didn't have to do things at all the way that people around me were doing them. Just because people around me were doing it that way doesn't mean that it's right or that it's the good way to do it. And then zooming out even further, you can look at the perspective of today's world, or you can zoom out and realize that the time that we live in is just one tiny blip on the radar of humanity. And when you look further back, you realize that the way we're living today actually isn't normal at all. So in the United States, we have 5% of the world's population, but we use 25% of the world's resources. There's nothing normal about that. And it's pretty similar here in Switzerland. What you realize is that actually our lives are very extreme. And when you go back to, when you go more towards zero waste, that's actually normal in the global perspective of the world, and when you zoom out in time as well. And then for electricity, all the electricity that I used, I made from these small solar panels. And that was another really important lesson through all of this, and that is that sustainable living is also a spectrum. So a lot of people, when they think of sustainable living, they think of a Tesla, an electric vehicle, and maybe big solar panels on their roof. But the reality of that is that's only accessible to the top few percentage of the wealthiest people on earth. Most people who live really sustainably do it by actually having a lot less. So the people that are really truly living the most sustainable lives just don't have solar panels on the roof, don't have electric cars, they just have a whole lot less. And so once I saw that perspective, that's what allowed me, for example, to be able to live off the grid, because what I did, I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't buy an electric car or a huge solar system, but by needing a lot less, my solar panels only cost $1,000, and then I was able to live pretty sustainably in that situation. So I think one of the really important things is always remembering that there's a whole spectrum of ways of doing things. And when you look deeper, you actually realize that the spectrum that most of us Westerners go for is actually a false sense of sustainability. When you really look deeper at solar panels and electric cars, sure, compared to fossil fuel powered vehicles, they're more sustainable. But if we tried to transition the whole world to electric cars and solar panels, it would not be possible. It's actually only possible in a very unequal and unjust system. So it's just a really important thing to keep in mind when you want to actually understand the truth behind our actions. So this is about the amount of trash that I was creating in a month at the tiny house. So more than I was on the bike ride, because it was easier. I didn't have to carry it with me everywhere I went. And that's another really big lesson that I learned, is that the easier something is, the more likely you are to do it. So one of the helpful things with trying to live a more sustainable life is to make making trash difficult. So for example, one of the things I did is I put my trash can outside and I had no trash cans inside my house. That way, if I had garbage, every time I had to walk outside, it made it very noticeable and very difficult. So the more convenient and the more easy things are, the more likely we are to do it. So sometimes one of the helpful things is to make the thing you don't want to do actually inconvenient. So lastly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the food waste fiasco. And let me see, is there one I missed? Okay, cool. So, darn it. Okay, so when I first started dumpster diving, I was actually pretty quiet about it at first. And dumpster diving again is going into garbage cans and eating garbage. So it's not actually like really a cool thing for a lot of Westerners. Now, of course, it's not garbage. Just because something is put in the garbage can doesn't make it garbage. But in the United States, most people, when they see someone collecting food from the dumpster, they assume they have no other option, that it was their last resort. They generally associate it with experiencing homelessness, with not having a home. So when I first started to do it, I was a little quiet about it because I didn't know what people would think. And there was actually someone back home, a woman that I very much was in love with, I guess you could say at the time, but we weren't together. But she told me, we were just friends at the time, and she told me, don't tell anybody you're dumpster diving. So for a while I listened. Fast forward a year, this is her, I don't know if you can see, Cheryl. And and we ended up dating for 4 years. So this is proof that you can eat the trash and have the girl too. And that's really one of the most important things that I've learned through all of this. The thing that was holding me back with almost everything, it wasn't the action itself, it was wondering what people would think about it. It was the social norms, the social stigmas, and the interaction with society. And so what I decided after a while was that rather than worrying what people would think, I was going to look at life through the lens of how does this affect the world, my community, other species, and myself. So when I was younger, I would spend probably about an hour each day in front of the mirror, gelling my hair, changing clothes, putting on different clothes that I liked. And it is pretty easy to spend just 1 hour a day worrying what other people think about you. So I did a little math, and I calculated that if you just spend 1 hour each day worrying what people think about you, that adds up to 3 years of your life and 5 years of your waking life. So imagine what you could do with that time instead of designing yourself for the sake of impressing other people and what others think about you. So when I realized that I don't like to waste anything, I definitely don't like to waste 5 years of my life. So when I realized that, I decided I'm not going to look at life through the lens of what other people think. Instead, I'm going to look at the lens of, is this beneficial to the earth, my community, and myself? And that's what has really, for me, been the most helpful thing in allowing me to make the changes that I want to live the life that I want, is just stepping outside of the societal norms, freeing myself to have the time to do what I really want to do. So can you still see the pictures? Okay, I wasn't sure the light got closer. So I'm just going to show you a few of these food waste demonstrations. That first one was Orlando, Florida. This is Miami, Florida. This is Detroit, Michigan. And this is 4 hours worth of collecting food from grocery store dumpsters in a city that I'd never dumpster dove in before. Just going around with some volunteers with an SUV, like a big vehicle, who drove around, pulled up to the dumpster. I got out, looked in. If there was food, we put it in the car. That's 4 hours worth of dumpster diving. This is Cleveland, Ohio. 7 hours worth of dumpster diving. This is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This is 2 cars going out for 4 hours each, so a total of 8 hours. This is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The next one is New York City. And then this is Burlington, Vermont. So Burlington, Vermont is considered to be one of the most progressive places in the United States. It's where Bernie Sanders is from, which probably all of you have heard of Bernie Sanders over there. So when I was invited to Burlington to do a food waste fiasco, I was pretty worried, you know, could I do it? And this was what I found in the dumpsters in Burlington. Now, the good news is that almost all of this was being composted. So it wasn't going to the landfill or to be burnt, it was going to be turned into soil. The bad news is that when we waste perfectly good food, we only recover about 1% or less of all of the resources that goes into that food. The pesticides, the fossil fuels, the water, the herbicides and the fungicides, the human labor. And when people who are spraying say the strawberries with pesticides have 2 to 4 times higher rates of cancer and respiratory diseases, you're wasting all that life. Half of that cancer is for food that's going in the landfill. So composting things like apple cores and things like that is a perfect thing to do. But perfectly good food is something that should be eaten and not thrown away. And then this is New York City, which means I went backwards. And this is San Diego, California, where I lived for 5 years. As you can see, you can eat very healthy food out of the grocery store dumpsters. And people would always ask me, well, what did you do with all of this food after you collected it? And my mission was never to feed people directly. My mission was to help change the system by really shaking people up and seeing the big picture. But people would always ask, well, what are you going to do with all this food? And I would, you know, at first I was a little worried about giving it away because what would happen if I got sued, if someone got sick from eating it? But of course, people would ask for it and I'd say, you could take it. So what I would do is I would say the demonstration was from like 11 to 3, and then at 3 o'clock, you could take the food. So this is at just before 3 o'clock, and then this is 3 o'clock in about 15 seconds. Click. So that's the same demonstration. You can see all the people collecting the food. So if I needed proof that this food is still good, it's the fact that hundreds of people from all walks of life have taken this food home and eaten it. And I've gotten pictures from people on the internet showing me the big sandwiches that they make, but no one has ever messaged me to let me know that they got sick. And I've eaten out of hundreds of dumpsters and fed hundreds of friends out of the dumpsters as well. So proof that the food is definitely still good. So in closing, you know, a lot of times people become overwhelmed with the situation of the world that we're in. And there's every good reason to be overwhelmed with the state of the world right now. So some people ask, like, well, what's the point in even trying? You know, I'm just 1 in 7 billion people. Can I really make a difference? And the reason that I'm standing here today is because I think we can make a difference. I don't think that I or that any of us here can save the whole world, but the last day when I was doing my project of wearing my trash, sitting in Union Square Park in New York City, I had a pretty nice realization. That was, as I mentioned earlier, imagine this is 1 month of trash. And imagine what a year would look like, a decade, a lifetime. It adds up to such an amount that it could be a small mountain of trash to leave behind for future generations, or no mountain of trash at all, which to me is really proof that our actions really matter and really add up. And that's just one of the ways that we interact with the world. Now, if you look at all of the ways that we interact with the world, with our fellow humans, and with other species, you can see that in a lifetime, you can actually have a really, really huge amount of positive impact in the world, or a huge amount of destruction. The good news for us is that probably all of us here are quite privileged people that have the ability to make positive changes. Some people, there's a lot of people in the world who are truly struggling and don't really have the resources in order to be able to live zero waste or eat a local diet or make these changes. But the really good news for us is that we have the ability to make those changes, and by doing so, we can help people who don't have the ability, and we can spread our wealth and our resources to reduce inequality and injustice in the world. So my hopes tonight is that, you know, you walk away from here with ideas of things that you want to do. Not that you have to do. You don't have to do anything, but things that you want to do to increase your own quality of life and increase the quality of life of the people around you and around the world. Oops. So I made a list because people ask me often about the first changes that I made and what other people can do. There's so many changes you can make. If you go to my website, robgreenfield.org/100, that lists over 100 positive changes that you can make. And at ZeroWasteSwitzerland.ch/tips, they have tons of guides on all the different ways to reduce waste from your life. Also in the book, I actually just realized there's 120 positive changes you can make. That's actually in French too, so you can use that. And on that note, someone from Zero Waste Switzerland is going to come up and share some tips you can do to create less trash and live a more sustainable life. And then we're going to have time for questions after that. Yeah. So there you are. Well, you don't need this. I'll be back. Oh, you need this?
No.
Oh, turn it off. Okay.
On va vous donner quelques témoignages. On est tous de ZeroWaste Switzerland et éventuellement vous donner comment le zéro déchet en fait a pu changer notre mode de fonctionnement et notre mode de vie. Alors moi je suis Aurélie, j'habite Morges, je suis maman d'un petit garçon qui prend des photos et puis je vais passer pour que chacun se présente et puis je vous donnerai un petit témoignage après.
Hi everyone, my name is Justinia. I'll speak in English. I'm Russian and we work in Geneva. So we're from the Geneva region and we're also from Zero Waste Switzerland.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm president actually of Zero Waste Switzerland and I'm also from the Geneva region.
Alors, en quelques mots, je crois que beaucoup d'entre vous sont sensibilisés au zéro déchet, donc je ne vais pas vous faire la leçon. Comme beaucoup, moi j'ai été éduquée dans notre société où on achète au supermarché, où j'ai consommé des tonnes de pètes et beaucoup de choses que maintenant je regrette. S'il y a une leçon peut-être à avoir sur le zéro déchet, c'est que il y a tous les R que vous connaissez sans doute, le refuser, réutiliser, l'autre, le rendre à la terre. Donc je vous invite à aller sur le site de Zero Waste, ils y sont tous. Il y en a un qui n'y est pas, c'est renoncer. Et en fait, moi, dans le zéro déchet, j'ai renoncé à un certain nombre de choses, mais sans aucun regret. J'ai renoncé à ma voiture, j'ai renoncé à mon travail pour suivre mon mari parce que ça me semblait plus important. J'ai renoncé à boire du coca en bouteille ou à acheter des choses neuves. Et en fait, ça ne me manque pas. Au contraire, on est très heureux comme ça. Et donc, ce R-là, il est important et je pense que vous pouvez aussi l'utiliser sans aucun problème. Mais il y en a plein d'autres. Allez les découvrir sur le site ZeroWasteSwitzerland.ch.
We were going to say that one of the most inspiring, I think, for both us and our friends, things that we've done so far, probably, was a zero waste wedding, which we held just 2 days before the lockdown. We managed to, of course, people had to fly in, some of them, but the crisis did help with that because not everyone could fly in. So it was pretty zero waste in that respect. But otherwise, yeah, we did a vegetarian wedding for 100 people, and we didn't use any single-use anything, nothing that you usually see at a wedding, especially the Russian one. I find that this is a powerful thing to encourage your friends and to show to your family how this can be done. If you're already comfortable with the zero waste lifestyle, it's just a wonderful thing to just show it without having to just discuss it every single time you run into people. That's my piece of advice.
And my piece of advice would be just to start. If I'm completely honest, there are things I like in the zero waste lifestyle and there are things I don't. So I do the things that I like. And I think every person has their own preferences, their own likes and dislikes. You don't need to tick a list and do all 100 items on a list. You just need to pick some that fit you and your lifestyle and make your impact however you can. So it's not a militant thing. It's not strict. It's not prescriptive. Just start somewhere, and before you know it, it will kind of roll and roll and roll on, and you'll end up doing a lot, I think.
And visit the website.
That's it, I think.
Thank you.
You going back?
Good. So you can ask questions, and I just want to say, and thanks for the tips. I've understood the ones in English. You can ask questions about anything that you want. It can be personal things, because a lot of personal things are important to know about. So you can ask, whatever you want. Basically, there's no question that's off the table. There's no question that's weird. I encourage weird questions. So go for it. I didn't know Swiss were so shy. Yeah?
What's your next project?
What's my next? Well, my next project is to try to get back to the United States.
Why?
I only have 90. I only have technically 90 days in the Schengen region. Why? The United States is my home. The United States is the country that's causing the most destruction in the world, so it's where I feel most of the conflict. But as far as my next project, so one of the recent projects I did is I did a year of growing and foraging all of my food, which is actually the true zero waste food, is growing your own, because there's no plastic. Well, you can grow food with plastic. It's one of the most unpacked. That's my next project. I'll be starting that next spring. There'll be other little things in between, but that's my next big project. Yeah? What's my relationship to technology? My relationship to technology is a very challenging one. We don't see it, but technology is one of the main destructors of the world. The internet has so much going behind it that is largely supported by the military-industrial complex that we just don't see. And the corporations that run a lot of the internet, such as Facebook, for example, are some of the big, in many ways, destroyers of the world. At the same time, as there's huge downsides to technology, there are incredible upsides to technology. It is one of the great, it is one of the great tools of our generation, where we can use it to educate ourselves and to spread knowledge and to uncover a lot of injustice and inequality that wouldn't be as easily uncovered. But at the same time, a lot of us use technology to become completely disconnected from the world and have really no understanding of how to interact with the earth that gives us life. So my goal is to try to use technology in a way where I can, use it as a positive tool. And I do that well to a certain degree, but I also, it's the most challenging thing personal health-wise. My personal health suffers because of the amount of time I spend using technology to spread positive messages, but also when I'm on there, I get sucked in to a whole bunch of time wasting instead of looking at the beautiful mountains or hiking. So what? It's pretty good. So actually one of my next projects that I've never done before is I'm going to take a month off social media, which for me will be a wonderful and possibly life-altering project. And so, yeah, it's difficult, but I'm trying. It's one of the most difficult balances for me. Now, to go a little further, I minimize my overall technology use. I just have a computer, no cell phone. And right now, the only technological item I own is the computer, the charger, and the headphones. So I have reduced technology to a large degree from my life. But of course, I still fly in planes sometimes and get into trains and such. So technology is definitely a part of my life.
Do you have a social media team or something like digital marketing? Because your teams, like when I'm online, you're everywhere. So I feel like it must be a pretty strong team. So I'm wondering also, like, how do you put together this team? Probably just volunteers and just kind of your journey.
Yeah. So the question was, do I have a social media team or a team in general? Yes and no. I do have volunteers that help, and sometimes they help and sometimes they make things harder, depending on if they decide to do what they say they're going to do, or they say over and over they're going to do it, and then I end up wasting a whole lot of time. So, but no, in truth, I absolutely could not do what I do without working with other people. So for a while, well, when I first started, I ran a marketing company and I had a fair bit of money because when I started in 2011, I was in business and I was very focused on money. When I woke up in 2011, I woke up to the destruction caused by the monetary system. And over the next 4 years, I transitioned my life to living with less and less money. At first, though, I had money in order to build my online presence and to do the initial adventures and to hire people. I had an assistant. Then I transitioned away from having a company. In 2015, I committed to earning less than the federal poverty threshold, to not pay federal taxes, because in the United States, federal taxes are not used like they are here in Switzerland so much. Up to half of it goes to war. And if I was paying federal taxes in the United States right now, I'd be paying for the police brutality against protesters who are protesting police brutality. If I was paying federal taxes, I'd be paying for that. So anyway, I've committed to making very little money. 100% of my media income is donated to nonprofits such as my book or TV shows and such. So I have very little money involved in my life now. So I'll do a lot of stuff with volunteers, but I also partner. So for example, I recently got a grant and I partnered with a nonprofit in order to produce videos to share messages of solutions for the world. So I still involve myself with money, but try to use money as a tool for good as much as possible. I've had a volunteer that works 10 hours a week for the last 6 months. Today's their last day. So I didn't get around to finding a new volunteer. So I will be on the computer some over the next few weeks. But the other thing is I work a lot with journalists. So the way that I try to strategize making change is by everybody doing the thing that they're good at. Journalists have a giant network already. So for example, when I did a TV show at Discovery Channel, the budget for that TV show was $2 million. $2 million of spreading my message. And that way I had a team of 100 people for that, period of months. So my team varies, in so many different ways. But yeah, that's a little bit of an idea behind, the team aspect of it. One of the questions online was, what is the biggest change, the single biggest change that you can make to have a positive impact in the world? And the answer is there is no one single biggest change. It depends on the environment you live in and who you are, whether you live a privileged life or you have very little access to resources. So the answer is that there is no one biggest positive change. It depends on the scenario. Now, I would say one of the biggest things though is food, because we eat food, 3 to 20 times a day, depending on the person probably. And because all 7 billion people generally get to do it every day for the most part, it is the largest way that humans interact with the world because we all need it. We don't all need to fly, but we all need to eat. So changing the way we eat is one of the absolute biggest things. And for me, the biggest things are local, unpackaged, I mean a practice of working with the earth rather than against it. I shouldn't even use the word organic. It's not about that. It's about growing it in a sustainable manner. And a big part of that is definitely looking at where your meat comes from. A lot of vegans would like to say going vegan is the absolute biggest change that you can make, period. But when you go a lot deeper, you realize that that's actually not true. There's many scenarios where having meat as a part of your diet that is raised in an ethical and humane way is actually more sustainable than in an environment where you are isolated, living in San Francisco, for example, eating a vegan diet. So that's what I mean when I say there is no one answer. It depends on the scenario you live in. One of the other really big ones, though, is flying. Flying is the most destructive thing that we do on any given day. If you talk about carbon, one flight across the ocean is like, well, I don't remember the exact, I calculated, I think a round trip flight across the United States was the equivalent of eating 1,200 hamburgers. So a big, it's a big impact. So flying would be, one of the really big ones. So yeah.
So there's one more question from the chat. My kids would like to know where Rob used the toilet in his tiny house.
Okay, the question is, where did I use the toilet in my tiny house? My toilet was outside. I've had a compost toilet in both of my tiny houses, and actually Natalie has a compost toilet at her house. She's got a really nice, it's pretty luxurious, but it's actually pretty simple. A little luxurious compared to mine. You switched to a compost toilet 6 months ago? Yeah. So if you want to experience a compost toilet, ask Natalie if you can make your dinner at her house, maybe. And then leave your dinner in her compost toilet. If you're interested in composting poop, the term in English is humanure, for human manure. And there's a book called the Humanure Handbook, which has been translated into many languages. It's written by Joseph Jenkins, and his nickname is the Pope of Poop or the Duke of Duty. And it's a great book that teaches about that. And it's actually, that would be a massive change. If we composted our poop, that would be one of the biggest shifts in society. Also mentally, if we all started to deal with our own poop, that would change the way that we looked at our environment.
One more question from the chat. Do you think people really realize with COVID the impact that we have on our environment?
So the question was, do I think that people really realized with COVID the impact that we have on the environment? Some people, yes. Some people, no. I think a lot of people, the more they become involved in the environmental movement, the more they start to hang out with environmentalists, and the more they start to think the world is changing. But a lot of the times they've just changed their surroundings. What you forget is that China and India are possibly going to have middle classes of 300 million people, the size of the United States. And right now, they want McDonald's and they want shopping malls, which means the trajectory is that if that keeps happening, we could be consuming something like 5 to 7 times the amount of resources the Earth can produce in a year. So yes, millions of people have woken up just in the last few months and are making huge amounts of changes. Like one of the big things that so many people are doing right now is growing a lot of their own food. Stephen, you said you started to grow a lot more food during coronavirus, right? And someone told me the bike shops were like selling out of bikes. Was that you, Diana? The bike shops are like record sales and selling out of bikes. And in the United States, the seed companies can't keep up with the order for organic seeds of people wanting to grow their own food. So yes, millions of people are waking up, but also at the same time as that is happening, I think more people are being born and thrust into consumerism than into living a more sustainable life. So you have some of both. And yeah. Any more questions? Another online one? Okay.
How did it change your relationship to money? And do you prepare for when you are older? Are you still in the same paying taxes?
Okay, how did I change my relationship with money and am I prepared for when I'm older? There's a lot to that. I'll answer the am I prepared for when I'm older? Yes. I'm 33. I'll acknowledge I'm a young, fit person. So that is where I'm acting from right now. And acknowledging my privilege as well. A lot of what I'm doing I can do because of the privileges that I have. With that being said, there is this idea that money buys security for your future. And I think if you've looked at the current humanity, you've seen that money does not buy security. First of all, we don't really know what the world's going to be like in 50 years. So part of me is not designing my life to live in 50 years expecting the world to be the way it is today. I don't know if Social Security in the United States is going to exist, or if mutual funds won't collapse if oil collapses, for example, where a lot of people have their stocks. So I don't think the most secure future is money. I think the most secure way, the best way to secure your future is with relationships. So that it's the way you deal with people and the earth and the other species that we share this earth with. So I'm designing my life around creating community. And I can say that, but there's not too many things I will say for a fact, but I can say for a fact, humans existed before money, and our relationship with each other existed before money as well. Community existed before that, so it's still possible to do it that way. So my plan, my basic retirement fund is putting myself doing good service for the world, and I truly believe that if I do that for 50 years, that in the years that I am in need of help, that it will be there. But one of the most practical things to do is live in intergenerational communities. The truth is that if you just took the skills that we have sitting here together, and we all talked about what skills we have, we could, by working together, largely remove ourselves from the monetary system through exchanging the skills and the resources that we have. So we live in a time where we're able to work together in order to take care of each other. And that's basically, I would say, partly my faith in humanity, but it's not a faith in all humanity, it's a faith in designing a life in a certain way. So I could go a lot further on that, but that's a little bit on that. One note to that is that also the system is very different in the United States than here in Switzerland. So in order to really understand where I'm coming from, you'd have to understand the system there, which, I mean, healthcare and retirement and the way they treat employees and all of these things, it's a very different country to live in. If I was living in Switzerland, I would not be saying things the exact same way that I am, because it's a very different situation. One last question? Yep. So do I still live in a tiny house? I do not. When I left Orlando, I gave the tiny house to a community that hosts volunteers. And so that tiny house is now a demonstration site for sustainable living, as well as a place where they host what are called woofers. So woofing is short for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. So it's actually one of the really, if you are wanting to make a shift in life and maybe take a break from the busyness, one of the really beautiful things I would recommend is volunteering on organic farms. And how it works is you get your food and your lodging covered in exchange for generally 5 days of working 5 hours a week, or 5 days of working 5 hours. So about 25 hours a week, and you're living on an organic farm, learning how to grow food, living simply. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And you can do it in Switzerland or all over the place. Do you have another question?
Yes, from what I understand, you don't have a lot of things, so you were here in March, which is cold. So how does it?
Yeah, so her question was, from what I understand, you don't have a lot of things. So you were here in March. How did you keep warm? So correct. Right now I own about 47 items. They're all in this back. Well, some of them are back at Natalie's house, but they all fit in this backpack. So everything I own is in here. And I do have a sweater, but no like jacket. And so when I got here in March, basically if I go to a cold climate, walk into a thrift store, buy a jacket. So we live in a time where there's an abundance of resources. We don't actually have to, for one, we don't have to hoard because there are so many resources available. But I'm actually doing kind of a personal experiment right now, and that is that I think that money creates an illusion of independence. If we have enough money to buy everything we want and to get every service we want, we can say we're independent. But the truth is behind every transaction and every dollar we spend, the truth is somebody is doing that for us, and other species and the earth that we live on is there. So the truth is that we are extremely dependent on everybody around us, and not just everybody around us. Today, everyone here is dependent on people on the other side of the world to have this life. So we live in this illusion that we're independent. So for me, what I'm trying to do I don't have enough. The truth is I don't have everything that I need all the time, which forces me to be dependent upon other people. Now, a lot of people would call me a mooch. I don't know if you have that word over here, or like a leech on society. But the truth is, what I'm trying to do is be dependent upon other people, because I believe that we will only really care for something if we need it. I think communities that take care of each other are communities that actually need each other, not that can just fly off and get whatever else they need somewhere else. So I am dependent on other people. That's my personal truth. I grew up in a society that tells you should have everything on your own and not need anyone else. And I'm trying to overcome that and be okay with saying, I need your help. And I also feel in order to truly be able to be good at giving, you need to understand what it feels like to need to receive. So it's also, for me, a little bit of humility. I don't like to ask people for help. So this forces me to do it, and it keeps me, more humble and a practice of humility. So that's a little bit on that. And I think on that note, it's time for dinner. So you can hang out and ask questions at the table. If you buy a book, I'll be happy to sign it. And thanks again to ZeroWaste Switzerland. Do you want to say something? Oh, I didn't, and I can't read what that says, so I don't know.
You can say it in English.
But I don't know what it says.
If they want to order.
Oh, you can order it? Oh, for people online, maybe? I have this one. Thanks again to ZeroWaste Switzerland, and I love you all very much.
Thank you very much.